Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan and around the region. I'm Herel Hughes. In 1998, China's government launched an ambitious project called the Golden Shield. Its goal was to counter the rise of the internet and stop the spread of information. This virtual boundary is now called the Great Firewall. To learn more about this project and the effects it's had on Chinese society, we are joined today by Yaqiu Wang. Yaqiu is the research director for China at Freedom House and has years of experience in researching the CCP's role in internet censorship and human rights violations. Yaqiu, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So just to get started, we want to zoom in and establish what is the Great Firewall. So can you describe it to someone who may have never heard of this project before?
For a layman, I think the basic idea is, the government blocks on the fundamental level of websites that it doesn't want people to see. People inside China don't get to see the news, learn about things that the government doesn't want you to learn about, the history of the Chinese Communist Party, anything related to the Chinese top leadership, whether it's about their private life, their wealth, the infighting, things like that is probably the most sensitive. And Xi Jinping is the most sensitive of the most sensitive topic. Then there are other issues like protest and human rights violations. The most well-known example is the Tiananmen Square massacre. I mean, the censorship is done so well that, for the rest of the world, especially that iconic tank man picture, for the rest of the world, for people know that picture, people know Tiananmen massacre happened. But for most people, young people in China who have not experienced the massacre, I would say most people don't know that this event happened.
So you mentioned that the tech has become so evolved over the years. Do people notice the effect it has on their daily life, or is it just sort of integrated within society at this point?
I would say it depends on the generation. I'm in my mid-30s. So, when I was in college, that it was the time, the Beijing Olympic happened. So I had a memory of Google was accessible. I was able to read the New York Times, The Economist. I was able to use Facebook for a while, right? So I had that memory of an open internet. So then, of course, we all experienced the dramatic closing down over the years. But I think, for people who are in their 20s or, who are teenagers now, they had never experienced Facebook. They had never experienced Google. So they didn't experience that a period when China was connected with the wider global internet. So they had no idea. So for those people, when you don't know the alternative, they don't know the alternative existing.
So it's been over 25 years essentially since this project started. How has it had to adapt to technology changing? Do you think leaders anticipated the internet growing as fast as it did or becoming so integrated into daily life?
I think they have adapted to it remarkably well, because one key message I try to send to people who are outside of the Chinese, the Great Firewall is that people in China, they have an internet, and then internet functions pretty well. They have the entertainment they wanted to watch. They play games. Oftentimes, it's more convenient than the internet you have outside of China. But what people inside China they don't have is any kind of content the government doesn't allow you to access. It's not just a website that you type the address, you type google.com, doesn't show up, right? It's also when you discuss an issue, you can't post a comment because it contains a certain sensitive word. So that kind of political censorship is very sophisticated. It's very robust. But while when it's outside the political sensitive content, you have great shows to watch. You play games. You talk about movie stars, sports stars. So because the internet exists and functions well outside of the political sphere, people don't know that they are missing a large part of it. So that's for the people inside the country, right? For people outside the country, I always tell them, when you imagine the Chinese internet, it's not like a gray and dark or depressing depressing place that there's just censorship. There's nothing exists. There is a robust internet exists in China. It just there's not there's no content that are critical of the Chinese government.
So you say part of the adaptation was creating their own internet ecosystem and letting people thrive within that, but keeping everyone else out in a way.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, like people, even I know a lot of Chinese diaspora who came from China. They go watch the shows. They go to the inside the wall to watch more interesting, entertaining stuff.
So, in your years of researching China and the CCP's role in censorship, would you deem this project as successful or effective?
Well, I think it's I would say like extraordinarily successful. Unfortunately, when I talk to people in China or people who just recently left China, just there's just such a gap in understanding of I would consider facts of events that have happened just because the government has created such a paralleled information space where people, as I said, people are able to enjoy certain information, certain content, but people can't access content that the government deemed politically sensitive. So just by talking to young people, talking to people who are in China or coming from China, you just get sense the government has so successfully uh, created a alternative information universe.
Now we want to zoom out. We've established what is the Great Firewall. How has it affected how Chinese society is developing?
Well, I think first it was the internet as the webs, the browser, websites. I think the internet has so much have moved from web-based internet to an app-based internet. I mean, I was saying so many websites that get blocked, right? I think right now people mostly don't go to any websites. They just go to an app. So it becomes a little like wall of gardens. You go to Xiaohongshu, you open the app of Xiaohongshu, then there are the censorship and surveillance managed by the company that owns Xiaohongshu. Then you go to WeChat, then there are another set of censorship, right? Of course, they all take directions and orders from the Chinese government, but it's right now it's even more limited than the initial idea of just blocking websites that the government doesn't allow. People don't even go to websites anymore. They just open their apps and read what is ever is provided within the apps.
Is it just political content that's censored, or are we seeing it in entertainment as well?
Political sensitive information is always censored. Then there are more and more types of political sensitive information. That is for sure. But there are also, information that regarding cultural events, gender roles, things like that, also get more and more censored. Basically, LGBT content, right? Women's rights content, even just content depicting a romantic love affair. Things like that are getting more and more censored. I think it's also because besides, political censorship over political content, it is also Xi Jinping's wants, China to go back to the traditional culture, traditional family values. Men supposed to play the traditional man's role, women play the women's role. So overall, the cultural sphere become more and more conservative. That's what the Chinese government wants, and also that is reflected on the internet censorship. The government censors more and more like content that have progressive values.
So, what happens to people who hit these censors? Do we see forms of punishment? Do we see intimidation? What happens to people?
I think the first thing happened to you is that your social media account gets suspended or removed. I mean, especially when your WeChat account gets removed, it's a big thing. It's not just, you cannot express yourself or you cannot see other people's posts because WeChat is a super app. It's tied to your bank account, your, taxi account, your, food ordering account. It's a super app. So if you said something wrong and your account gets suspended, like your real life gets really affected. So, that's one aspect. Then the other, it can be real, punishment in the sense of police harassment, police intimidation, or, detention. And the worst, you get sentenced to years in jail.
So this year marks 35 years since the Tiananmen Square massacre. In your research of this, have you noticed a change in how people are talking about it?
Yeah, that for sure. I think if I actually glue myself onto the internet, I would be able to see dissent, but it gets removed so quickly. So let's say some protest in China happen, right? If right now at 10 p.m. Washington D.C. time, if I go and check out the Chinese internet, I will be able to find the things, the dissent people are expressing. But if I don't watch it right now, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., I go to work, I start to check the internet, things are gone. So I would always say that people do have this dissent, and people do express dissent, but it gets removed quickly. That doesn't mean that it never existed on the Chinese city. It did exist on the Chinese internet. So it requires you to act, really watch it intently. I mean, most people, they don't, right? So, next day you check the internet, it's not there. It doesn't mean that it never existed. So I always try to remind people to not have that kind of assumption.
Have you noticed a lot of self-censorship as well?
Well, of course, if you live in China, like that's just you breathe air, like self-censorship. That's just like you breathe air and exhale CO2, right? That's just life because of the severe punishment for speaking up. So I mean, that's like a knee jerking. It's in almost, I would say, in your brain.
Well, I also want to talk about how a lot of dissent has had to move abroad because of this. And one of the most famous dissenters, Li Laoshu, or Teacher Li, as many know him on Twitter. And he has 1.5 million followers on Twitter. Can you talk more about dissent moving abroad?
Because expressing dissent is getting harder and harder within the Chinese internet, whether it's on Weibo, on WeChat, or Xiaohongshu, or Douyin, Doupan. So people have no alternatives, so they have to jump over the wall, right? So definitely, they wanted to express dissent on the free internet. They also wanted to access free information on the free internet. That's, a big reason why the Teacher Li has such a big following. As I know that during the white paper protest, there was a surge of following on Teacher Li's account because people in China were so curious about what's going on. I know that a lot of people send their messages to him, like whatever happening to them, with the grievances they have, or human rights abuses they observe in China, send those information to Teacher Li because he has such a big platform. So if he posts the information, it gets read by a lot of people. Then if you post the information yourself on your own account.
Well, yeah, Cho, I think that covers everything that we wanted to talk about in terms of the Great Firewall. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. For more stories from TaiwanPlus News, please follow us on social media. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee,
We make the news.
Here's what happened on TaiwanPlus.